Right, so good afternoon, and we're ready to put ourselves in place for the last session of the day. It's a good thing. Glad to have you all back. This session will be a really interesting one, I know for me, I hope for others, because it's about legislating climate action. We can talk about it, we can put a lot of things forward, but to get it into law, it's going to be people like the folks that we're going to hear speaking with Kara Cook. So, it will be Kara Cook as sort of the moderator for the session, with Senator Sam Singh and Representative Abraham Ayash. Kara as, yes, yay, yay. As many of you know, Kara is the Chief Climate and Energy Strategist for EGLE. Most recently, she served as Chief of Staff at the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and previously served as Senior Advisor to Governor Whitmer on energy and environmental protection. Senator Sam Singh is Majority Floor Leader for the Michigan Senate. He's always been committed to a life of civic engagement. He is the first Indian American elected to the Michigan Senate, where he's serving his first term. His parents immigrated to Michigan from India in the 1960s for a better life and an opportunity for the American dream. But from an early age, Sam's parents taught him the value of giving back to the country that had given them so much. He's no stranger to Lansing, nor to Detroit, where I've known him for years. He served 3 straight terms as Senate Representative from 2013 to 2015, where he was a passionate champion for K-12 education, environmental protection, and economic development. His last term, his colleagues selected him to serve as a Democratic leader. On the other side of the aisle, Representative Abraham Ayash is the Majority Floor Leader in the Michigan House of Representatives. He's serving his second term in Michigan House. He's the son of Yemeni immigrants. He grew up in a working class family. His father, a UAW member, and his mother, a homemaker, raised their children in Hamtramck. He now represents House District 9, encompassing his hometown of Hamtramck and surrounding parts of Detroit, advocating for progressive solutions and justice for his community. So, with that, please, take it away.
Is this on? It is. Amazing. So I'm not going to do too much talking up here because I want to make sure that Senator Singh and Abraham Ayash have the opportunity to really share their experience as legislators and what it looks like legislating climate action in Michigan. But I'm really excited to be here with you guys, really closing out day 1 of the conference. I'm sure all of you are aware, and we've talked about it a few times throughout the day, but last year the Democrats in our legislature and Governor Whitmer really delivered on transformational clean energy policy changes at the end of last year. These have way too many things for me to go into in just a few minutes, but a few of the highlights I just want to set us up with. So these bills now, put Michigan in a place where we have a 100% clean energy standard by 2040. We're going to remain a national leader with our energy efficiency programs. We've given new tools to our utility regulator to make sure for the first time that they're able to consider things like affordability, equity, environmental justice, and climate change in their decision-making around utility plans. We have a plan in place to make sure that this transition to clean energy is a just transition, and so much more. Many of you in this room, and many that are not in this room, were really instrumental in making sure that we could get this across the finish line on a really tight timeline last year. But really let's clap for everybody in the room. But it really came down to leadership, from the governor, from all of you, and from legislators like the 2 panelists I have next to me. I was really proud to be a part of the kind of negotiations over last fall, but because of folks like Senator Singh and Representative Ayash, as well as other legislators, including Senator Sue Shink, who I see right in the front row there, we were able to get something really transformational across the finish line. So with that, I want to move to questions. So first question for you guys. You both spearheaded the clean energy package, but it wasn't your first foray into looking at environmental issues or climate issues. You've really had a deep career in prioritizing these things. You have to deal with so many issues as elected officials, not just climate and the environment, like many of us in this room get to prioritize. What makes you want to prioritize climate action, and how has that looked throughout your careers?
I remember growing up, I'd walk to Kosciuszko Middle School, and the standard procedures when we cross Joseph Campo, we would put our T-shirts over our nose because we'd smell what was burning garbage at the time, the Detroit incinerator. And I thought that was normal. I genuinely had no idea. It's like, oh, it's just a day in the life of living in my community. And we did that for years. And it wasn't until I got to Michigan State, go green, that I realized this is not okay. That the structures of where these things are placed and why they're placed in certain communities and so on and so forth was a problem. And that led me to sort of continue in that work and fighting back with the late Representative Isaac Robinson and his mother, Rosemary, to fight for better standards with what was then the MDEQ to ensure that these polluters that were in our backyards were not going to keep getting away with abusing our communities by violation after violation and continuing to get permits and just calculating all these costs associated with running business with fines and what have you. So that's sort of what led me into this work, is it didn't make sense that someone in Hamtramck and someone in Heartland had very different lived experiences simply because of where they lived and how policy affected that. And that's sort of been the impetus for why I've continued in fighting this fight. And it's been tough, right? Because unfortunately, climate, although it's a sexy issue, it's not a profitable one for a lot of industries. So there's always an attempt to keep the status quo because the status quo means more money in shareholder pockets. So that's sort of been my drive. And then I like to copy Sam Singh. His parents are immigrants. My parents are immigrants. He went to MSU. I went to MSU. He ran for the House. I ran for the House. He decided to become floor leader. I decided to become floor leader. So hopefully I'll continue to follow his footsteps.
Maybe you'll become a senator?
Can't say that yet. But
Well, I had obviously a little bit of a different path. I had the opportunity to be in local government before I started in the legislature, and I served as mayor in the city of East Lansing during the time that the Kyoto protocols were being developed. And obviously during that period of time we had President Bush, and obviously climate was not a top priority of that administration. And so there were mayors across the country that were looking at how do we adopt the Kyoto protocols for our own communities. And I was able to work with the mayor of Lansing, who was Virg Monero at the time, and I think there was 17 other communities throughout Michigan that began to take a look at that. And so we started our own sustainability plans in our communities and began to sort of walk down this path. And so I ended up in the State House, and I ended up having to be a negotiator at the 2016 policy around energy when we had a Republican governor, a Republican House, a Republican Senate. And they started off that legislative session with trying to remove the very modest renewable energy standards that we had at 5%. They wanted to eliminate that. We had a very modest energy efficiency standard. They wanted to eliminate that. So we started that at the beginning of that session. And by the time we got to lame duck, because Democrats were needed to be part of the final decision making, they had to cross the aisle, and Democrats stood together and said we would not support anything if there was not an increase in renewable and energy efficiency standards. And we had very modest increases. We went from 5% to 15%. We made it to the 1% in energy efficiency for annual sales. But we did that in a completely Republican controlled environment. And so for me, I always said to myself, wow, wouldn't it have been great if I was in a Democratic controlled environment that had priorities around climate. And then luckily I found myself in that place, obviously in January of 2023. And just for those of us who were all together at the last climate conference, it was just that week that in the Senate we introduced a set of bills called the Clean Energy Future Act. There was a number of bills there. Poor Sue Shink and myself and our staffs worked all during our spring break to have bills ready for introduction. And even though they changed dramatically over the following months. It was at least the beginning of the conversation. So I want to just commemorate the fact that we were here about a year ago talking about these ideas, and you helped us be able to get this across the finish line. So congratulations to everybody here.
So to recenter us on last year's legislation, both chambers introduced really similar packages, really led by the Senate, and then we still had leadership from the House, from Representative Ayash, Representative Pohutsky, and others. Can you guys both talk about kind of what inspired that package, maybe focused, Senator Singh, from your perspective on what you started on in the Senate, and Representative Ayash on the siting legislation that you worked on?
Well, we have to give a lot of credit to you, Kara, and to the administration and Governor Whitmer for, pulling together the committee and group that ended up with the Michigan My Healthy Climate Plan. We really used that as the basis of the bills that we put in. We wanted to go further than what those bills required, and so I even think when we introduced some of the ideas, I don't know if we had full agreement yet between both chambers or even the administration on some of the ideas and some of the numbers, but we wanted to at least force that conversation to happen. And then I also want to just acknowledge that there are a lot of stakeholders in this room who have worked, session after session, getting bills introduced to expand the renewable energy standard, energy efficiency. They've been doing this for, close to 15, 16 years and probably even beyond. And those groups were ready for us to be in majority to have some of these ideas. And so maybe not on the Senate side, but definitely on the House side, a lot of those ideas ended up in the House versions when they were finally introduced, and I know Abe will talk about that. But it allowed us to have a nice contrast with the items that were in the House and then the things that were in the Senate, and allowed us to begin to negotiate using those as bookends of the conversation.
So what Sam's saying is that the House version was better.
Originally, yes, it was.
But I want to give a huge shout out to Senator Schenck, because her particular bill, which I think is one of the most important pieces of that package, there was an attempt. Yeah, we can clap. It's like a Jeb Bush moment. Please clap. That package, or that specific bill, there was an attempt from industry and other stakeholders to really try to water it down, where the legislation was effectively not going to have the teeth that we wanted it to have in order to make sure that Michigan was a leader in renewable energy, not just this arbitrary term of what clean energy means, but actual renewable energy, and making sure that our communities were going to be protected and considered on things like climate change and equity and so on and so forth. So her stubbornness, as we talked about, is really what helped us keep the Senate pushing forward so we can find that happy medium. And we knew that whatever the Senate was going to help us move across the finish line in terms of the clean energy plan, needed to make sure that there was a mechanism in place to actually move us towards that renewable energy standard and moving towards that clean energy portfolio, which requires wind and solar. And for a long time, there was a conversation about, we have the Wisconsin model and we have the Illinois model, and we can look at those two. And Kara, with your help, there was an incredible, with her leadership rather, there was an incredible lift to say, what can we do to build the Michigan model? A model that respects autonomy of landowners, ensures that farmers get to pick their freedom and their future, and we are allowing locals to have input in the process, but also ensuring that we have a mechanism in place that gets us to that 2040 goal by allowing the deployment of wind and solar in large scales so that we can actually meet those goals and generate the power necessary through the renewable standard. So we were able to do that successfully. It took a lot of work. I know the Senate went to bed and we were still working on the legislation until 3 in the morning, just to make sure that all the pieces were there to recognize that we were respective of local communities, practical in terms of moving forward towards a clean energy portfolio, and then ensuring that folks were protected, be it through community benefits or through farmers and landowners having that independence and that autonomy. So, the 1-2 punch, as we called it, between the House and the Senate, we're able to move a portfolio and a clean energy package that also had the mechanisms and the tools to get us towards that goal that we set out.
Amazing. So, is this working? Okay, good. So you guys both just talked a little bit about the kind of sausage making that happens in this process. Representative, you just mentioned we were in the chambers at one point until at least 3 a.m. working on some of your bills. Many folks in this room have been a part of that, but not everybody has like the privilege or burden of dealing with some of that deep policy making. Can both of you guys shed a little bit of light on what that process looks like? Who are the key players that get involved? What were things that surprised you throughout the process? What were some of the critical steps to making sure we could get this across the finish line?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of groups here in the room. Obviously there was a set of environmental organizations, and I don't know if I want to list them all, but they were very critical. We had environmental justice organizations who were pushing us further and further, and I think some of them didn't actually like where we ended up, but at the same time, that's part of a process, especially when you only have one seat majorities in either chamber, which means that any one of the Democrats who ended up voting for this could veto it at any point in time. So I do think it was helpful to have sort of that group of coalition members there. Labor was a critical part of this conversation, and I don't think we got to the final resolution until Labor signed off for the last couple of members in both chambers, which I think a lot of the Just Transition Office that we have developed came from language that Labor had worked with us to ensure that as changes are being made, that those workers would be able to have access to the training and technical assistance that they would need to be able to have those jobs in the future. And so those were really critical. And then there was a number of energy organizations, businesses that were, looking at community solar and some other things, and they were another critical component of that coalition. And so, just want to be thankful that we had a fairly diverse coalition of groups and organizations. And, we also then had some really key consultants. And, we don't probably mention him enough, but, Douglas Jester is somewhere there in the back. And I will say that I leaned on him a lot, and I think many of us, both from the constituency groups that are here in the room, but also us as legislators, to use his knowledge and wisdom to help us think through some of the more thornier questions. So, Kara would be in the meetings with us, and somebody would be like, we got to get Douglas on the phone and help us think through this one. And so, I want to be thankful to him. And then just the incredible team. Yep, he deserves that applause. And then we had an incredible team at the Public Service Commission, Michael Byrne, Rika, obviously Chair Scripps, and the rest of the team. They were just such an incredible part of the process and partner as we go here. Now, they're the ones who are going to be responsible and, actually implementing this stuff. And so, we're excited to see where they lead us over the next many months to go.
Nothing to add, Abe?
Whatever Sam said. I would say that the only other point I'd add is, as someone who grew up in the climate activist space, it was sometimes incredibly frustrating that you wanted to move an issue forward, but there was a recognition that at any point, one member could be a Joe Manchin. And the traditional players in the space would want nothing more than the status quo. That if nothing changed, then they would be okay. So there was that delicate balance of recognizing we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to move legislation that would truly be transformational. It's not necessarily transformational in all the ways that I would have had hoped, but the alternative was nothing was going to change. And we cannot and we could not have allowed that to happen with a Democratic trifecta in a situation where we are seeing the impacts of climate change every single day. And it was something that I felt was a responsibility on the behalf of both caucuses to say, if we can move the ball down the field and be proud of what we accomplished, we can always enhance and make it work better. And, I always say that government moves like honey, but it's not as sweet. It's very slow. But we had an opportunity, and I think we leveraged it to the extent that we could. As Sam mentioned, we had so many incredible community groups. We had so many experts. We had so many environmental lobbyists. But we also had to deal with the component of some industries and the utilities, so on and so forth, that we had some consternation with. But it became a question of, do we do something that was going to be transformational, or do we allow the circumstances to stay as they are and we may not get another crack at this apple, or a bite at the apple rather, for many, many years. So, the Senate's ability to shepherd the legislation and really negotiate as much as they could, and then bringing it to the House, that was really an incredible feat. And there was moments where folks thought it wasn't going to happen, that we would go home for Thanksgiving and there was not going to be a clean energy standard. There was not going to be an opportunity for us to deploy that clean energy, but we were able to get it done. And we're proud of that work, and now the implementation is coming forward, and we have to see how that plays out. We can always figure out where can we continue to improve to ensure that there's a balance of ensuring that people's economic opportunities will still be there while also protecting our planet and in continuing the fight for environmental justice.
So Sam, earlier you mentioned that these bills really made Michigan a national leader. Can you talk about, from your perspective, how do these position Michigan as a leader? Like, what pieces of these laws make Michigan kind of stand out uniquely?
The energy efficiency law, actually, Abe and I both had those bills in each chamber, and as I was negotiating, Abe would always say, listen, do not lose the low-income piece of it. And there were a couple times I thought we were going to lose it, just as part of the negotiation and so forth. And Abe was always saying, no, we can't. And, I'm proud that, we have now a minimum spend of all the utilities that have to be in the low-income space. And that, I think, is unique when you compare energy efficiency programs that states have created across the country. And so I'm really, really proud of that. And Abe, you were an instrumental part of at least keeping that conversation alive. I think the Just Transition Office is something I'm really proud of. There are a few other states. We look to Illinois and Colorado to their Just Transition offices, but ours is even beyond that, right? It's not just about an energy transition. It's also about a manufacturing transition that we know we're going through here in Michigan because of the electric vehicle space. And we're the only program in the country that has both energy transition as well as manufacturing transition as part of the core principles of that office. And I also think that there will be other things. We left the door open so that office could work on other things, and I think AI is the other big thing that it will probably address at some point in time as well, and taking a look at those industries that are going to lose jobs because of the change that AI is going to provide. And so I think that will be helpful there. So those are at least two pieces of, there's a lot of, standards of getting to 100%, different ways of doing it and different formulas and so forth. But I think kind of some of the low income spend items as well as some of the labor pieces were really critical.
I've never heard Representative Ayash this quiet, so it must be the end of the day. So we've got just about 5 minutes left. So I guess I want to ask a few questions. We've got a lot done since last year. We still have a lot more work to do. What are both of you as policymakers thinking about, or what are your colleagues thinking about for the next steps for implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan and taking climate action? Either what you're working on right now or what you might be thinking about in the future.
I think there's incredible interest within the audience on things like community solar, and that's going to be a tough conversation. There's no doubt about it. There are stakeholders at play that have very strong feelings that may be different from what the clappers and I feel, but that I think is going to be something that we have to look at, and then also trying to identify as we roll out all these programs for wind and solar and the energy efficiency, do we have the funding necessary? Can we draw down those federal dollars now that we have a robust, one of the most ambitious clean energy plans in the country? Can we leverage that to then bring the federal monies to actually implement that program? So it's going to be a huge focus, I think, for the next couple of years. I'll be around from the outside helping in that way, and I think that's going to be a huge part of this component, is recognizing that the plan is in place. Now we have to actually workshop the plan and put it into action. So that's going to be a huge first step, and we will continue the push for more independent ways of drawing solar power, be it people's homes or people's communities. I think those are the ways that we can have those conversations. And at some point, there is going to be a breaking point that we can actually leverage to ensure. So for the folks out there that care about those issues, do not give up. Stay obnoxious, stay persistent, and keep hounding our colleagues to try to get this done.
Yeah, I think community solar was one of the items that I was most disappointed that we weren't able to get across the finish line, and so I do think there is going to be work that needs to continue to be had on that conversation. I do think, I'm working on a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit to help try to decarbonize the aviation industry, obviously one of our larger polluters, but obviously a critical part of our Michigan fabric with having a kind of a hub here over at Detroit Metro. I do believe that there's going to be probably trailer bills that once the commission is fully looking at implementing this legislation that they're going to need to sort of kind of find areas that we might have missed. And then if you look at the governor's My Healthy Climate Plan, there's a lot of work to be done in a number of those areas as well. There's more work that we can do in transportation. There's more work that we can do in building decarbonization. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of work to be done. Now the question is, do we have enough capacity and time to do it this rest of this session where we only have 6-7 more months left, or some of this stuff will have to sort of move into next session, and that'll be part of the questions that we have to kind of work out over the next few months.
And final question to close out day one, why should all of us, or why are you guys inspired about climate action? It's a huge challenge in front of us. We've gotten a lot done, but there's so much more we need to do.
Can the folks with the white hair, I'm trying to be politically correct, can the folks with the white hair please stand for a second? Anyone that has white or salt and pepper hair, please
I like
stand.
that there's like 4 people. Okay, keep standing.
So here's, and please clap for them. And I'll say this. I was born in the 90s, and what I will tell you is I look at the folks that have been doing this and fighting this fight in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, so on and so forth. And when we have people that look like what I will look like in the future, it's truly inspiring to see so many young folks super passionate. I love Gen Z. I think you guys are going to save this world, and I mean that. I feel like an old man when I say that because it's like, oh, we're not that distant from each other. But what I always remind my generation, the millennials and then the Gen Zers, who I'm still trying to understand, is if these folks have persisted in this fight, they have stayed in it, they have continued to fight for a cleaner planet, they've continued to fight for environmental justice, more protections for our natural resources, more accountability for polluters. If they have not given up, there's no excuse for people like me, for people like the senator who's getting there, to give up. And that's one of the things that keeps me motivated every single day, is that this is not going to be a fight that is going to be easy. It's not going to be an issue that will get hundreds of millions of dollars spent on it annually to try to break down. But if folks like those are still doing the work and still saying that we can fight for a better planet, a cleaner planet, a more just planet, then why is it that we should stop in that fight? So that's what keeps me going. It makes me so excited to see those folks in the room still. They haven't packed up and went home and said, I'm not going to be here much longer anyway. You fight because you still believe in this planet, and because of that, it's what keeps me driving. So,
thank you. Yes, give him a round of applause. Abe was obviously a great partner, and you can understand why. I would have stood up because of the gray hair, but it's hard to leave these very comfortable chairs. So. I would just say this was a unique moment in time. I know we were talking about the legislation, but what had preceded this legislation at the federal level, and I think sometimes we get so upset about the federal government and get angry about what have they done. We sort of forget the investment that has happened by this administration on climate, on infrastructure, on things that are going to make an impact. It really is going to change everything that we've been talking about. And I think it was a very huge factor in why we got everything done last year, as much as we could get done last year. And I will tell you that when I talk to national groups and at different places around the country about our legislation, everyone is telling us that, you guys are doing a really good job in Michigan in pulling down that federal money. And so, I've got to say to the Whitmer administration, Kara, and the team of everybody else that's sort of working here, we're doing a great job of pulling those federal dollars, and that is what's going to take us so much further in this conversation than just the implementation of the legislation itself. And that, to me, is what's exciting. So thank you for all that you did to make sure that we got this done last year so we can fully take that federal dollars and make it a reality here in Michigan. Thank you, everyone.